Hi, MC1 Gamer here. I'm back with a closer look at the Lore of Undeath from the End Times book, the new book with Nagash. Now, I'm not going to go and talk about the merits of the Legion of Undead or the whether or not this is legit or not for all Warhammer games, or whether or not it's viable for tournament use, or what rules are appropriate. I'm just going to go into what the spells are for the Lore of Undeath and how you might use it, what it might be useful for, and how you might use it in a game most effectively. And please feel free to comment and throw out your own ideas. This is after looking at it for a few times, playing one game with it, and looking at some of the other reports that I've seen, and some of the other analysis and conversations I've had online. So the first thing I want to go and mention is, of course, the Lore of Undeath is takeable by all wizards, and whether or not you're playing just end-time games, or if you're including this into regular games, anybody's going to be able to take these spells, and that's going to have an impact on how effective it might be for various armies. But the first thing I'm going to look at is how it might be effective for the Undead Legions army. So, because they're going to have access to not only enhancements based on whether or not it's a special character or not, but also with the other lores, the lore from the Tomb Kings, but most specifically, and something that I'm more familiar with, the lore of vampires, and there's the synergy that they create. But let's just take a quick look at a couple of rules before we dive into the actual spells. First off, the summoning spells rule. There's a couple of specifics that a lot of people don't know about. Maybe they're just starting to learn about this. Maybe they don't have the book yet, and they're just reading stuff that's online. The specifics are this. If you're summoning any units using the Lore of Undeath, there are limitations. It's not just carte blanche. You have to have you have to be within the spell range, and just about all the spell ranges, as far as I can see, are 12 inches. So you're not reaching across the battlefield and actually popping up massive units or terrorgeists every turn. This is not going to happen, and I'll explain why. Most of what you probably have read or seen, maybe in White Dwarf or on some battle reports, we're using Nagash, and Nagash triples everything, which means he basically can reach out and touch just about any place on the battlefield, depending on where he's positioned. So let's forget about Nagash for the time being. Let's forget about the special characters. Maybe we'll hit upon those a little bit later. Let's just talk about what the average Master Necromancer, Vampire, or the casters, the wizards on the Tomb Kings, anybody who might access this from the Undead Legions, and what it actually means. They're going to have to raise these units solely within 12 inches of the actual caster. And they're going to have to be 12 inches away from all units, all buildings, and all impassable terrain. And if there's not enough room, and it says it specifically, if a summon unit cannot be deployed because there is not enough room, the unit does not interplay at all, though the spell's attribute may still apply. I'll get into what the attribute is in a second. This is really important because some of these units are fairly large. Should you actually get a Terrorgeist onto the board using a summoning spell, it's a pretty large base, and if your caster is sitting in the midst of a massive horde of skeletons or ghouls or whatever, it's still measured from the base of your caster. So unless they're sitting on a corner, and unless the area that you want to raise these units to are fairly close to you and there's nothing in the way, this is a very specific limitation. And if enemy players, opposing players who are going up against an army of the Legions of the Undead and the Lore of Undeath, should very much be well aware of this, because in a cluttered battlefield, especially as units start clashing and connecting with each other, you can neutralize where that summoning can take place with just a few units, small units, characters. If they can't position the entire block of their units within that 12-inch range, and maintaining that inch away from basically everything else, it does not happen. They will not bring that unit onto the battlefield. Very specific limitation. Now, as far as the lore, the attribute lore, And this is also something that a lot of people don't know about. There's a lot of limitations for these spells where you just are not going to be able to bring in these massive units without some boost. Yes, if you're Nagash and you're tripling it, or if you're Archon the Black and you're doubling it, you're going to be able to basically pick and choose if you can get this spell off. But if you're an average run-of-the-mill, even if you're level 4, you're not going to. There's still a maximum. There's a cap based on what level you're casting these things at, and the only way that you can exceed that is from previous castings, either from earlier in this spell round, in the magic round, or in previous turns of casting, where you can build up essentially tokens. This is the lore attribute for Lore of Undeath, and it's called Raise the Dead. And it reads as follows: you place a dead counter, which is a coin or whatever, on the battlefield. Each time a friendly wizard successfully casts a spell from the Lore of Undeath. And any friendly wizard that subsequently casts a Lore of Undeath, a summoning spell from the Lore of Undeath, they can choose to expend one or more of these counters after they successfully cast their spell. And for each counter that is expended, they can increase the points worth of the model summoned by that spell by plus 10 points. So yes, maybe if you're building up this reservoir of casting points that you then want to use in a big chunk to try and get something really big or get a very large unit, it can have an impact. But let's really explore what this means. You're not going to be starting off with this pool. You're going to have to start casting some other spells, which means you're going to have to start wasting dice, typically at least 2 dice, because you don't want to roll 1 or 2 if you're rolling that 1 die, because then that caster is done. That person's done, unless it's a level 1 caster, which is a lot of points to dump into a lot of these level 1 casters just for the purpose of building up this pool. Maybe you have one that's a scroll caddy. Fine, but how many of them are you going to have? So you're going to probably be looking to cast some of these spells that are just going to try and either plink away at your opponent's dispel dice, or they're going to disregard them because they're saving their dice for the big stuff. So maybe you'll generate a couple of counters, but in doing so, you're expending your dice. So unless you have a very big magic phase, you're going to be limited for the rest of that magic phase initially. Let's say turn 1. You're not going to be pulling out a Terrorgeist turn 1 unless you're Nagash or Archon. The reason why is that, and we'll go over the spells, is that you're just not going to be able to achieve the amount of dice necessary while you're generating these reserve points that and go up against the dispel dice that your opponents are going to be saving for just this purpose. So let's assume also that they also have a dispel scroll, so they're going to nix that effort right off the bat as well. So let's just assume that that you're not going to be getting off the really big summons probably in turn 1. You're probably going to be fleshing out the dispel scroll, burning some dice, maybe getting a couple of smaller spells off, maybe using this to try and just neutralize that dispel scroll in turn 1. And that's probably what's going to happen. So let's move on now to the actual spells. The first spell in, and actually before we actually even go into that, let's talk about the rules for resurrecting fallen warriors. Now that's really important because, and it's very similar to what you see in the other books, the Tomb Kings and Vampire Counts book. But what it really says is that you have limitations and you have requirements in terms of how you're bringing back units or raising up units that have been slain as a result of the spells, either from invocations, from, say for instance, Vampire Counts, or from some of the spells like Morkarn, where you get some rules. And I'll go over that in more detail. But it specifically says that that you have to do them in a certain order, and you have to bring up a unit fully up to full health before you bring in another unit. Let's say it's a multi-wound unit. So you can bring units that have bring models that have been destroyed that are multi-wound units, for example, and chariots or monstrous infantry and the like. But you're going to have to heal those up fully before you get another model. So something also very much to keep in mind. And they have to be in a specific formation. You can't just like summon up for instance, a conga line. They have to have 5 models or 3 if they're monstrous wide before you can start building additional ranks. Excuse me, yes, you could do a conga line, but if you wanted to do ranks, you have to do them in a normal formation type scenario, like for at least 5 models wide before you get, say, for normal infantry, you can get the 2nd rank. So you couldn't go like, 5, 2, 1 or something like that. You have to do a regular formation, and that should be pretty standard. So let's now go into the actual spells. So the first spell, Rise, the Grave Call. This is the signature spell, and so you're going to probably be defaulting on this spell should you pick one of the spells that maybe you don't like. And this is not a bad spell. You cast on a 9, and it's a summoning spell. It has, again, a range of 12. That's pretty much the default. And you can summon a single unit of infantry worth up to 50 points, and it's an infantry unit from either the Tomb Kings again or the Vampire Counts. And it's not a bad spell. 20 points you can get a good deal of say, for instance, zombies. You're not going to get any elite troops like Grave Guard or Tomb Guard, for example, for 50 points. So you're probably going to want to boost this. You're probably going to want to boost this to 100, in which case the casting cost is increased to 14. And honestly, if you're really going to go that far, you might as well go to 16 and make it 150 points, which is the next tier option. Much more effective in that regard. Yes, if you're looking just for some kind of a speed bump or redirector unit, you can throw out a really simple cheap cost at relatively cheap cost at 9+. It's not really worth it. If you're going to go this route, you're probably going to want to build a reasonably good sized unit. On the other hand, if you've built up enough tokens and you want to go cheap and use those counters rather for the +10s to try and build a sizable unit at a cheaper cost for casting, that's great. You can just stick with the 9 and maybe take a couple of those counters for the +10 points, and you can start building up maybe additional units. But you're probably going to get cannon fodder just to try and, again, speed bump or redirect or maybe even charge a flank. But what's the really most effective thing that you can do with this? The real effective thing you can do is if somebody is in combat with you, hand to hand with your caster, or is about to, you can summon with reasonable surety on a flank for a counter charge, knock out their rank bonuses, get a flank bonus and a charge, which can have a huge impact should you obviously survive their charge. For the following turn, and that can be very effective. But one of the other things that can be really effective is to pull out a unit of maybe elite infantry, like I said, Grave Guard, Tomb Guard, but they're also extremely expensive, so you're probably not going to want to do this at the cheapest level unless you've got a number of those counters saved up. But do you really want to waste them on this spell? Maybe. It really is situational. But there's a lot of options, and I think this is a pretty good default spell, a good signature spell to count on. Next we have Morkarn. That's the #1 choice. Breath of Darkness. And this is cast on a 6+. And it's an augment spell. It targets one friendly unit, and it's also, again, within 12 inches. And the unit immediately gains die 3 + 1 wounds worth of models. So it'll heal them back if they're singular wound models, or it'll heal back wounds on multiple wound units. But then they get an extra bonus, and this is nice. This is actually nice. They get a free full normal move, as if they were in the remaining move subphase. That's great. That's a nice bonus. You're not going to get as much, as many wounds or models healed or restored as you would with, say, for instance, an Invocation of Nehek. But you get a really nice bonus, and it's at a pretty cheap cost at 6+ to cast, of being able to then get a bonus move on top of that. And that can have a huge impact. Maybe it won't have an impact this turn because you're not going to be able to charge with it. You're going to be able to move and take a regular standard move or a march move. But you could put units in position or get them out of position of a charge or get them out of position of line of sight in ways that can very much affect the game. Again, you're limited by the range, 12 inches. So you're either going to be out there already, maybe you're a mounted caster with a cavalry unit, or by yourself, or if maybe you're on a monster or some kind of a mount of your own, in which case you're taking lots of chances. But you could be a cheap caster on a flying mount, or have a magical item that does so, or you know, you might be in a unit where, again, you just want to position something that may be in danger, or maybe even blocking you in some capacity, and get it out of the way. It's a nice effect, but it just doesn't have the same impact as you would from, say, an invocation in terms of healing. But it can be very useful in certain situations, so it's something to consider. The next spell I want to look at is Solikim. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Hand of Dust. And that's cast on a 7+, not extremely expensive. And what it says is that it's an augment spell, and it's used specifically for wizards in close combat. So, you know, you may already have a wizard that is not necessarily a combat monster, and you want to give him something a little bit of a boost in terms of having an impact on your opponent. This could be something that you might want to consider. And what it does is you can make one attack on an enemy model in base contact with him or with your mount. And if the hit roll is successful, the target model suffers up to you roll a die 6 for the number of wounds, so you're rolling multiple wounds. Sure, this can be warded, but if you fail this, you're going to be doing lots of wounds on, say, characters, for example. So this could be pretty dangerous if it gets off, and it's not an extremely high cost at 7+. It's got there's no armor saves. So yes, ward saves, but no armor saves. That's pretty severe. If the caster slays an enemy with this in a challenge, you immediately gain die 6 raise the dead counters for free. So that's die 6 plus 10 points for effect counters for future raises, summons, and the like. That's pretty effective. That's pretty good, but it's pretty ballsy to be using it in a challenge. You're probably going to be using this with those combat-oriented casters, so they're pretty expensive, and you would be devoting dice for that. But you'd probably be able to do that with, say, a vampire hero or a vampire lord, or the equivalent caster combat variants from the Tomb Kings. Again, I think this spell definitely has a place if you're stuck in a combat, stuck in a challenge, you're not getting anywhere, there's having a pillow or tickle fight. This could be one of those things that really could change everything. So again, it's situational, it's got limitations, you're not going to be using it every round, it's going to be just when you get stuck in, and you also have to have this spell on hand with that caster. Are you going to devote that maybe singular spell slot for your level 1 vampire lord for this spell? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of times you might be defaulting to the rise spell or the invocation spell. You might want to default to a signature spell just because you want that restoration capability. But this could really, really have an impact should you have it and should you get into the right situation. Next is the spell Khazar, and this is the SoulStealer. This casts on an 8+. So the way it reads, it's a direct damage spell. It has a range, again, of 12 inches. What you do is, it's pretty much like a Banshee Scream, kind of like a baby Terrorgeist Scream. So it works the same way. For each point, you roll 2 die 6, you add 2, and for each point, the result exceeds the target's leadership by, the target suffers 1 wound with no armor saves. So, and it does also have an added caveat that if you cause at least 1 unsaved wound, you immediately gain an additional die 3 of those raise the dead counters, which can help you substantially, again, in follow-up castings for the effectiveness of future spells. So this is nice. I mean, look, it's not tremendously effective because you're going to be going up against, in a lot of cases, units that have pretty good leaderships, especially if you're dealing with elves, 9s, maybe 10s if there's a general in that unit. It's pretty difficult. You have to roll pretty well, and you want to devote enough dice to get an 8+ to get this. I'm not really a big fan of Banshees. They do have some merits, but they're expensive, and I usually don't take them just because it's a lot of points to devote just to get that scream that it more often than not does not work. And you might not have the synergy here with, unless you've built a certain type of list, to get things like being able to get a -1 to your opponent's leadership, or any other factors that might impact leadership and reduce that. Still, 2d6 +2 average is going to be below what my opinion, it's going to be. You're not going to be doing a lot of wounds. I don't like this spell. I would much prefer to have something along the Terrorgeist level, which is the 2d6 +6. But of course, hey, that's a Terrorgeist, and you really can't compare that, because that's, in a lot of cases, that's a little bit broken. Even though the Terrorgeist is a bit of a glass cannon. So I wouldn't recommend this spell particularly. A lot of cost, very little reward. It's really it's hit or miss, and in my opinion, mostly going to be a miss. So the next spell, Razkar, the Abyssal Swarm. It casts on a 10+, and you can summon. It's a summoning spell. You can summon, again, within the 12-inch range. You can summon a single unit of war beasts or swarms for 75 points worth. And it's selected from the list of units from the Undead Legions. So right off the bat, the first thing that people are going to think of is Spirit Host, and that is, in my opinion, absolutely the best option. It is a swarm. It does count. I'm not going to raise bat swarms when I can get a Spirit Host, and they're immune to magic. They're really going to ruin somebody's day. There are times where a singular Spirit Host have saved a game for me. Hold up a huge monster that didn't have magical attacks, or even a steam tank. Phenomenal unit. It does have its limitations against spells and against units where they have either a magical effect from an upgrade, or a character that has a magical weapon, but that doesn't happen all the time. So this can be extremely effective. 10 cost, not terribly expensive. You're going to be devoting some dice, but again, this could really change the game for you for a relatively a low cost to get a nice unit in there that your opponent may not have an answer to. And you can boost this. You can boost this up to 150 points worth of monstrous beasts, but this is at 16+. I don't like this option. Okay, I think the only real option, if you were to go do this, would be the Tomb Scorpions, for example, from the Tomb Kings. But it's a heavy cost, 16 to do that, and it's 150 points. So that's a lot to ask when you have a lot of other spells in your tools in your toolbox to go and boost this up to 16 to get something like the Tomb Scorpions. Good unit, but it's again, you're doing it within 12 inches, so you have that risk of having to fit it within that area. If you're going to use this spell, Razkar, I think, and I would recommend, use it at its base cost. Get yourself some Spirit Host. Get yourself something. You're going to get 2 of them. Not a bad unit. And at 45, well, actually, no, you're not going to get 2 of them. You're going to get 1, and that's enough. That's fine. It's worth it, in my opinion. I mean, for that cost, you're throwing in a unit that can do a lot. And if you want to boost this up and get monstrous beasts, you're going to get a lot more combat-oriented units, not as much tar pit or speed bump or lockup type units. But it's just a real risk trying to get that, and I don't think you're going to get much reward out of it. The level 5 spell, Kandarak, the Harbinger, also casts on a 10+, and this spell is also a summoning spell within 12 inches. It's just, I'm going to keep saying it, but we all know they're all 12 inches. And you can summon a single character, and the character can be up to 65 points. It's selected from the lists of characters, obviously from the 2 armies, and you can choose if you want to, if you really want to boost this up, you can boost this one up to 200 points for a 24 cast. So this is a great spell, and this is the one that people are talking about. This is one that people say should have been the level 6 spell in this in the list. But let's take a look at the default version of this first. You can summon a single character worth up to 65 points. That's pretty good. You can summon a Necromancer. You can summon, okay, it's not going to have magical items, but it's another caster. Let's say you lost your baby Necro, or you lost your level 1 or level 2, and you can cut. You can, even if you didn't. Now you have additional channeling dice because you have another caster on the board. You could throw up a caster that could be well out of the range of, say, a summoning arc, and if you lose your main, your other casters, or even your main caster, now you have a backup. You could summon a Cairn Wraith. That is, again, just like with the Spirit Host, it's ethereal. You need magic to hit it. They have fantastic attacks. It's incredibly valuable for its points. I don't like units of them, but I like them taking them as characters. That's pretty effective. You could summon a White King. It's not going to have any magical items again, but a White King for the value for 65 points is phenomenal. Toughness 5, Strength 4, Killing Blow, 3 wounds. Absolutely fantastic. It's going to be bare naked, but that's so what? You got it for free. You cast it on a 10+, and you got an extra character. I mean, that could really make the game for you, just like any of these other summoning spells. So that's really effective, in my opinion. You could then join a unit, maybe protect your caster for a follow-up round with that. So I think that's a good value for just a 10+ cost. Here's what people are freaking out about, and that's the one, the boosted one, where you can get up to 200 points to monsters, a single monster, or chariots or war machines. I think that this is, it's a little bit controversial, but let's really look at what really we're talking about here. We've got a unit up to 200 points, okay? You're not going to get a Terrorgeist on the default casting of this. Terrorgeists are 220 points without any upgrades. You're not going to get, can you get a Vargolf? Sure. That's a hefty price for a spell that you need to roll a 24+ for. And then, you have to roll enough dice. You're definitely going to be risking a miscast. And you probably, this is one that's going to probably flush out that Dispel scroll. And I don't blame people for doing so. So you're going to be basically crippling your turn, that phase, your magic phase for that turn, just trying to get off that spell. But if you can get it off, it's going to be pretty substantial. But how are you going to get that Terrorgeist? Everybody says, oh, I'm going to be raising Terrorgeist, summoning Terrorgeist every turn. It's not going to happen. In order to get a Terrorgeist, you have to either have a special rule from one of the special characters that allow you to multiply this by 2 or 3, and that's a tremendous amount of points with other disadvantages that plenty of people have already talked about, how vulnerable those characters are, because they're huge, they're monstrous, they're cannon bait. You're going to be taking cannons to the head all day, every turn from turn 1. And we don't know if you're going to survive those with those characters. But let's say, for instance, you have you're just trying to, you're really dead set that you want to summon up that Terrorgeist or maybe a unit of chariots. Yeah, you can do it, but you better be saving up those Raise the Dead tokens from previous castings. So let's look at it now. Turn 1, you want to raise a Terrorgeist. How are you going to do it? Let's say you roll a monster phase. You've got 12 dice in hand. You're going to have to spend some of those dice earlier in the phase to cast other spells in order to generate those Raise the Dead tokens. You need at least 2 of them in order to get a Terrorgeist. You got 200 on your base points, and you need at least 2 of those tokens to get 20 more points. All right, so that's going to waste some of those dice, and that's going to have an impact on whether or not you can then cast first of all, you get the spell off initially. You better have a really good phase so you can 6 dice this puppy, and you gotta hope that maybe in a previous turn that you've flushed out that Dispel scroll. But if it's turn 1, it's not going to happen. Not unless you roll a killer spell, a killer Winds of Magic, and even then, more than likely, it's going to get dispelled. So you really should take a look at all of these rules in perspective. People are losing their heads about being able to supposedly cast, just drop down Terrorgeists every turn. It's just not going to happen. People are going to use the same intelligence they use to defeat all, a Purple Sun and Dwellers Below and Curse of Years and any other really serious spell that everybody's afraid of. Caconic Choir, I can never pronounce that thing correctly. They're going to prepare for it, and they're going to use the strategy in the same way to defend against this particular spell. And this spell is harder in most cases, because even if you get that 24-point casting cost off, you better have some tokens in reserve to even get anything that's worth it. So just realize that there are counters to this, there are caveats, there are disadvantages, and there are limitations. It is not as cut and dry as, hey, I can summon a Terrorgeist every turn. It's not. It's just not the case. And then the level 6 spell is called the Dark Riders. And this spell is, again, a summoning spell, 12 inches, and you could summon a single unit of cavalry, monstrous cavalry or chariots, worth up to 150 points. This is a 16 plus cost. I think it's very efficiently costed for what you get. You're getting 150 points. Not a lot of points, really, when you consider how much it cost for a unit of Black Knights, how much it cost for a unit of Blood Knights. You're not going to get a unit of Blood Knights. You need to get a minimum of 5. They cost 50 apiece. It's not going to happen. Nagash can do it, and Ark in the Black can do it. Your average run-of-the-mill caster, even a Master Necro, is not going to be able to do it, because your limit just on default is 150 without the rules for a special character. What are you able to cast to raise for this? You're able to raise a skeleton cavalry, decent size, basic default unit from the Tomb Kings. You can summon, this is very effective, a unit of Black Knights. You can get 5 Black Knights for the cost of this, which is absolutely viable. Wonderful to build up a unit of Black Knights, 5 just out of nowhere. You're only going to get 1 rank. You're not going to get a supersized unit of them. My favorite for this, is the Hex Wraiths. I like the Hex Wraiths. I love Hex Wraiths in general. I've converted up my own version of Hex Wraiths for my Muslin, which is a Bretonnian-themed army. And but I love the idea that it's perfect. You can get exactly 5 Hex Wraiths, and 5 Hex Wraiths can be extremely, extremely effective. So there's a lot of different options here, but it's it's 16 casting cost. That's a lot. It's not cheap, but you do get a lot for what you get if you can get this off. And yes, you can add on to this if you have a whole bunch of these tokens saved up from previous casting phases, so you're not going to get a real serious effect. Like, say you did want to raise up a unit of Blood Knights, you're going to need to spend 10 of those Raise the Dead tokens. So how long is it going to take for you to use to generate that in order to get that 250 point cost for 5 Blood Knights? And it's going to take a couple of turns probably to do it. And then are you going to blow that on this spell to get Blood Knights? You're not going to get Blood Knights from this. You're probably going to raise up just a regular 5 model cavalry unit, or you might get a couple of chariots. Another very effective way of using this. I think raising up chariots from the Tomb Kings is a great way. You'll probably get 3 models out of that, three chariots. That's great. I think that's very much worth it. And so that's another alternative. But again, you're not going to. I mean, I know we've seen battle reports where 8 Blood Knights were raised, or 10 or 15 in the White Dwarf were raised. That was Nagash. Take Nagash out of the equation. Tournaments, whether they allow this or not, they may ban special characters in general, just on principle. They may ban Nagash and Arkan, even if they do allow most special characters. But if they do allow the Lore of Undeath and the Legion of Undead, I almost said Legion of Doom. If the Legion of the Undead Legions, this spell is effective for building up as a cavalry, or to pull out a unit of cav, a small unit of cav, or a couple of chariots, and put them in a position where maybe they can have an impact on a follow-up turn, maybe a counter charge, a flank charge, or whatnot. Because again, don't forget, as I keep mentioning, you cannot forget, you must be fully within 12 inches of the caster, and you've got to be an inch away from everything else. So that is a huge limitation when you're talking about a unit of cavalry or chariots, because they're bigger models than the infantry models. So that's the spells from the Lore of Undeath as it pertains to undead, and to the undead themselves, and some of the thoughts that I have on the spells. Some of the thoughts I have on how other armies might use it. The nice thing about these spells, especially the summoning spells, you could take a level 1 in any of these other armies. There's very inexpensive means to do so in a lot of these armies. You just get a cheap level 1 for under 100 points, sometimes a lot less than 100, and just take this lore. And even if you get the basic default summoning spell, the lowest level summoning spell, if you can get one unit of skeletons, one swarm, for one spirit host, any summoning you can get, you could probably substantially pay for the cost of bringing in that extra character and really change the game for yourself just by having one guy with this lore. Even if you're not playing an Undead or a Tomb Kings or a Lore of Vampires, it can be very effective. And I think that it would be nice to see things that would change up the game a little bit. If this becomes more widespread, and there's a lot of debate about that, I'm not getting into that debate, and I hope that people aren't going to go and clutter any comments specifically geared toward that debate. Let's just assume that this is accepted, it's widespread, even if it's not tournament or and competitive oriented. If everybody's playing it, and if there's an option potentially for people to take this in any army, why not? Why not take one cheap caster, even every once in a while, and see how that flies? It really would cause the people players to actually change up they're going to have to answer that problem. They're going to change up how they create their lists and how they formulate their thoughts in terms of how they're going to position themselves on the battlefield and how they're going to address an army that they know has a caster with this lore on the other side, even just a cheap low-level one. So I hope that was helpful. I thank you very much for coming to my channel, watching my video. I'm looking to present a lot more of this. Please, if you like this, please like it and comment. Feel free and subscribe. And I hope that you enjoy this, and I look forward to the next one.